Welcome to Permission to Evolve. I'm your host, Brandon Thielk. I'm a performance and life coach. I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Holly Deschenes. So today is a special episode. So we're a year into this. That's pretty crazy to think about. And first off, just thank you so much for all your help on this. This has been an amazing journey, and I have zero technical skills, so this is a beautiful thing, right? It works out well. So to celebrate the year, we're going to be doing another Ask Me Anything. I believe we did our first one, like 6 months in or something.
Mhm.
I think that's kind of good. Every half year, just bringing some stuff up and seeing what happens. So I have no idea what any of these questions are. So Holly's just going to throw them at me and we're going to see what comes up.
Yeah. Hopefully this is good. And those of you that have been listening since the beginning of 2026 knows that we added that segment, the Ask Brandon a Question segment to our regular podcast. But today we're just going to do all questions and see where we end up. Let's talk about the teacher or coach or person who you believe had the biggest influence on you and this work.
This is like a tough question because I feel like it it just kind of depends on where you're at. So if you get the perfect person at the perfect time, like that makes all the difference, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll like stick with that person. And, so yeah, I've had a number of mentors. And, when I was like kind of deep into the energy world, there was a few there. One of them was Cindy Dale. So she's written like 40 books on like energy medicine and just kind of all those dynamics. So I had a great working relationship with her for quite a while. And that was very valuable. It kind of took a lot of those aspects to the next level. Early on, I would listen to a lot of, Tony Robbins, Abraham Hicks. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's like law of attraction type stuff. And once in a while, I'll turn on Abraham Hicks still. Also, in terms of listening to things, Alan Watts is a big one for me that I generally revisit. And, just because there's such an elegant way that he teaches, I really love the Eastern philosophy stuff. I would say when like things like really started to hit home for me, it was a teacher. His name's John Newton. He calls it ancestral clearing. So you're dealing with a lot of generational patterns there. And so he was like a Hollywood actor at one point, and he was just like very spiritually driven. And so he does a lot around forgiveness work now. So he hosts all these calls, and a big part of his work is on making peace with situations. And so that can go back through the generations. He's got like a set of prayers and stuff he runs through. And, the way he kind of taught the nervous system, that's where like all the dots like started to come together for me, where everything started to land and connect on, how you free your system up from things pretty rapidly. And so I loved his approach because it was like very direct and head on. And there's a lot of clarity that came from, yeah, I did a couple of his certifications. I followed his calls for quite a while. I think like his was the one that really cemented things in for me where I kind of stopped searching at that point because I'm like, oh, like I get it. I don't need to explore 15 different things anymore. Like it all just kind of runs through this one kind of modality. That's like had a big influence on how I work, or the simplicity of the things that he does. I felt like that was a good mode for me to work under. And, I found a lot of success with that. Like it just has really simplified so many aspects of the healing process where, you're trying to revisit what happened in terms of like waking it up in the nervous system, and then you're trying to clear it out. And so at the bottom of that is always going to be forgiveness and making peace with something, because that's when your nervous system feels safe to let it go. And awareness is so powerful. So as soon as I start to focus on something, I'm basically like shining a light on the darkness, and it automatically starts to unwind from that. But if I can be very targeted in calling out what the situation is, in our session work, you'll notice like if I'm able to explain what you're thinking in a specific way, it starts to help you connect to it better. And then things start moving faster. The awareness and then also the energy behind it is going to be some sort of judgment. So that was like a huge foundational piece for me, where like judgment is the root of all suffering. So when I judge a situation as bad, now I start storing negative information around it. And so that really hammers it into our nervous system. We have to be able to shift our judgment about a situation in order to heal. I would say he was the final and probably the biggest influence. All the other ones I kind of felt like were stepping stones for me, but they always say, like, when the student's ready, the teacher appears or whatever, and that was kind of one of those cases where it stopped my search, where I'm like, okay, these things all make sense. It really built a high degree of confidence of this is what's really going on and this is the missing piece. I'm forever grateful for that.
So recently in one of the podcasts, you touched on your work being more in the somatic space. I know we touch on it from time to time, but for any of our listeners who are not familiar with exactly what that means, could you just say a little bit more about how you use that?
So somatic is just for referencing sensations in the body. So with this philosophy, we view the body as actually the subconscious mind. So we store all this information from our past. And if something's left unresolved or in this place of pain and trauma still, it's going to be locked into my nervous system. With somatic techniques, all we're trying to do is get in tune with what these stresses or these situations make us feel, because that's how we basically reverse it out of the body. Is once we start to create the awareness of, like, okay, when I'm thinking these things, it feels this way. Once I go into the body, and it's just directed breath work. So all we're doing is focusing on the tension and we're breathing into it. And what we're doing there is we're really just trying to create safety. So these things all happened in a time of stress. And so that engages the fight or flight response. And when I consciously focus on my body and feel it and take some deep breaths, I'm trying to shift my nervous system to that rest or digest function, or the parasympathetic side of things. And that's where we can reflect on things and we're not operating out of reaction. So when we start to really feel out the body and understand that these are just sensations that I'm telling a story about, basically our goal is to start to shift the story, which is going to allow us to move through the sensations. So if something's stuck in my nervous system, it's just because I've made that negative judgment about it and I'm trying to protect myself from it. So when I think about it, it creates this protection response. My nervous system contracts. And when we're trying to get things to open up, we need to be able to face whatever that is, but then also shift our story about it. And that's basically this idea of removing the original judgment that we made. So a lot of these things, they were too overwhelming when we were experiencing them in the moment. We've kind of left them in this negative place. But when I'm in a place of stress, like my mind narrows and I start to personalize the experience. And what we're trying to do is depersonalize it and zoom out and detach from the emotional story and start to see it objectively. When we can see something objectively, we have this power to work our way to neutral in terms of how we're emotionally seeing it. An objective lens is a neutral lens where I'm not personalizing the information. So all we're trying to do is feel things. And then as we feel it, we're shifting the judgment about it so that it can start to soften and let go. And as we unwind things, we start to see the deeper layers of that situation. We start to be able to see it from multiple angles. And that's what healing is. It's a perception shift. So when I can change how I'm seeing a situation in the direction of making it make me feel better, now that story is going to be less intense. There's going to be less judgment behind it. There's going to be less limiting beliefs wrapped up in it. I'm trying to depersonalize things so that I can basically process that experience fully and let it go. Okay. But as long as I have negative judgments about it, it is affecting me in some way. And so, we're going to be trying to protect ourselves in some way, shape, or form. And that's going to be through our behaviors and coping mechanisms and all that stuff. The feeling is really our guide. The somatic work is really to get in tune with what we're feeling. And so we only have power to shift how we're feeling if we notice that and go deeper and see what's underneath it. And then that's where the wisdom is once we resolve the situation, you have this new outlook on that situation that allows you to move forward in a new way. Until then, we're just operating in these patterns where we just keep doing similar things over and over again because we think that's what makes us safe.
So this next question is going to sort of tie into that a little bit. And this one is a question that comes from one of our listeners. I'm not going to say who, but she mentioned it to me a while ago, and this is the perfect opportunity to actually bring this up.
Okay, great.
And that is, how do you differentiate between an injury and pain stored from the emotions or the past?
That's a pretty difficult distinction, actually. I think it's all intertwined. I think that we're attracting certain situations to bring attention to the emotional layer underneath. So, if I have a blind spot, if I have something I'm not looking at, I'm going to attract some sort of scenario that's going to bring that to my attention. And that's kind of the law of attraction piece of like, well, if this thing needs my attention, the universe is going to orchestrate things to show me what's going on there. And so that may mean some sort of injury, some sort of accident, some sort of thing that shook me up. That's to like kind of stir up those emotional layers and bring them to the surface. And so I often kind of see it's like, if there's things you're not willing to look at, and there's a lot of pain underneath, like that's going to have to express itself certain ways. And so I might be attracting situations that might force me to look at it. So a lot of times I think like illness surfaces like when we're burnt out and we keep pushing forward, and there's something emotionally that's like really jammed up in us, and that could actually make us sick. I also think that we might attract certain scenarios that, yeah, like an ankle sprain or maybe some sort of car accident or whatever, that's going to really cause us to take a step back and look at things. And I think it's always like in the magnitude of what you've got going on. So, I think you're always getting messages along the way. And if you're paying attention to things, you can get them when they're smaller. But sometimes if we're kind of burying our head in the sand, we might need big events to really shake us up to take a deeper look. So I think the longer something goes on, the more energy it gathers. And so that could lead to, bigger problems if there's so much stored energy in there that it needs to be released some way to bring attention to us. I think they go hand in hand. And that's why I feel awareness practices are so important, is to like be really in tune with yourself so that when you're going about your day, you're not attracting all these bad situations all the time. Because usually those bad situations are just to bring the unconscious to the conscious, so that through the feeling, sensation, and the stress, like I'm shown that, hey, there's something that's not quite sitting well with me. And those are our opportunities to look at it. So, I think, and that's it, is that a lot of times our body, if we're not listening, it does things to shut us down so that we have to listen, and that could be like, also like maybe a hamstring pull or something like that, of like, okay, I wasn't listening to my body. I just kept pushing forward. And so like it kept weakening. And now that if I have the always pushing forward mindset, I'm basically not in tune with things. I'm just overriding everything. And so that needs to get louder and louder for me to listen. And so sometimes that might mean putting us out of commission for a little bit so that I can take a deeper look. And let's say, I think like injuries can be a huge accelerator for our growth process, because it does really force us to slow down. I think that's the biggest value of those things. And once you like find peace with things and start to unwind those emotional patterns, our nervous system opens back up where we start to restore flow. So it actually, in my opinion, when we deal with the emotional pieces underneath, like the healing process can accelerate, because we're opening up our nervous system to nourish ourselves, right? Because I might have had something locked down or closed down for so long that there's not a lot of nutrients in there. So I think, yeah, even like nutrition and all these things, it's only as valuable as your emotional state. So if I'm always in a state of stress, I'm not going to be digesting things and absorbing things as well either, right? So I kind of see all these things intertwined, and they're just different expressions of it. So the optimal state is always a relaxed state, and a relaxed state is always, I'm in this present mindset where I'm at peace with things. But if there's something that's like eating away at my mind, that's got to that has to come to my attention some way. And I think it does happen through the kind of orchestration of events that really do push these things to the surface, so that they do get our attention.
We might need to do a whole episode on that. And we could use my recent example in there. But
Mhm.
to keep this on the questions, I won't rabbit hole into that. But I think that's super interesting and worth talking about more in the future.
Well, I guess going back a little bit to the teacher question, that was one of the things that really clicked with me as well is, because these are group calls, like somebody would call in and like present a problem and he would always ask like, okay, when did that start happening? And like, what was going on in your life at that time? Okay. And so that's basically whatever their illness is or whatever they're going through. It's just this period of intense stress that they've kind of locked into this mode, and it's kind of poisoning them. It's hurting them on the emotional level. And so if you go back to that time and you start to shift how you see that situation that created all this inner turmoil, the body tends to restore itself pretty rapidly.
Pretty cool. Shifting gears a little bit. If someone is working on developing awareness, self-awareness, what are your thoughts around like the first signs? Like the first things will be like, "Oh yeah, I'm getting it. I'm developing this thing."
I think a big part of that is the personal responsibility piece. I think it's like starting to be able to see your part in the equation. I think that's key. So, because until we like seek awareness, it's more of like I just have all these patterns and all this programming, and I'm just doing all these things unconsciously. It's just all practiced habits, and I'm not questioning much. And when I'm existing in that way, there's things going on in my life, that we call problems, and I tend to think those things are happening to me. Okay. And because like, if I'm an autopilot, I'm not conscious enough to see my part in what I'm creating. That's the thing. It's like when we get repetitive problems and we start to see like, oh, I attract this similar type of like mate all the time, right? That's a common one where it's just like, oh, I date these types of guys or these types of girls, and they all have a common thread to it. Well, there's that's not that surprising because we all like operate in patterns, and you until you learn why you're attracted to things, until you learn what's underneath all these things, it's just like, of course you're going to be drawn to those things. You're drawn to them because it's trying to make you aware of what you're holding on to inside, rather than blaming the outside world and the circumstances and these things happening. It really is just this like, okay, well, like I'm not feeling good about this. And so there's something going on within me. And so the first step is like inward, where we start to slow down and start to question, like, okay, why does this keep happening? Maybe we find it interesting, or maybe we're frustrated with it, but it's like, that's kind of that first access point of like, well, do I have more control than I think I do? Okay. Are these things just kind of happening, stacking against me? Or is it like I'm doing things unconsciously that I'm not even aware of that are creating these scenarios over and over again? It's the realization that we do have patterns and that they are powerful and that they do create the results that we're currently experiencing. I think those are kind of those initial stages of like, you just start to question. You're just like, why is this happening? Is there something I could do differently? And so part of it is this desire to, if we've been struggling with something for a long time, it might be this surrender to like, I don't know how to fix this, and I might need some help with it too. I think that's like a powerful kind of first stage of, that's when people will get interested in like, reading like about psychology and, maybe listening to podcasts, things like that. Self-help is this whole idea of like, you're starting to go deeper and you're understanding that there's more to the game than you've been living. And so it's like you start this seeking initially to try and grasp like why these things keep happening in your life. And then what that does, it's so you understand yourself at a deeper level. And once you understand why you do things, they start to lose their power. That's where my opportunity for change is. I would say it's like the seeking mindset, the questioning mindset, starting to notice how there's like similar things that keep showing up in your life. I think those are all kind of those first steps to waking up self-awareness. Because once we start to understand that these are just patterns, now it's just like, okay, what can I do about that? And that's where you keep progressing.
This next question is a little bit about negativity bias, which I think goes along with self-awareness, but I'm thinking of this more situational as experiencing it in others. It's the person that you're trying to help, and no matter what, it's bad. Right? It's
Yeah.
the person who always, it's like a lose-lose. So, for example, there's a big change coming. You think, "Oh, I'm going to share this with them early that this change is coming. Hopefully that helps them adapt more quickly or have time to think about it or whatever." So then you tell them and then they're like, "Well, I wish you never would have told me because now I have to worry about this change that's coming." Then the flip side would be had you not told them and let the change just happen, then they would have been like, "Well, I really wish somebody would have told me before this change happened." I'm thinking about if you have any tips or anything you would say to people who are trying to work with or be involved with that kind of mindset.
It's just like a high degree of resistance to change. Most people really do appreciate continuity. They want things to stay the same forever, and that's actually battling against life at the end, because it's like that's the nature of life is things are always evolving and changing. Some people do build these comfortable lives where it's very predictable, and of course things pop in and throw them off, but they've probably worked hard at creating security, and security means predictability. Whether that's good or bad, like as long as they know what to expect, that there's a piece that comes with that, even if it makes them miserable. It's this resistance to change is like it's kind of it is the negativity bias that any change is ultimately negative, that change means bad, that's all it means. And so I'm not, my mind's not oriented to possibilities. It's not oriented towards expansion, to new things, to being like, oh, maybe there's a bigger picture at play that they just automatically, their first judgment is that, oh, this is going to be different. And so automatically that's going to be a worse experience. Okay. And a big part of what we talk about here is I say it over and over again is we need to have some sort of brighter future that we attach to. And that's what that's about. It's like if I just want to live the same day every day for the rest of my life, that is going to be a contracted negative mindset. It's going to be like maybe I've had a lot of struggle early on or at one point in my life, and I worked very hard to create stability and peace. And now I don't want to like surrender that, but I haven't healed any of the stuff that led to that. I automatically think like if anything in my life becomes destabilized or makes me question myself, like I'm automatically going to have a negative reaction. My advice here is to simply, yeah, you just deliver the news, because delivering the news that, hey, a change is coming, it may be met with a big emotional reaction, but at least like that's the opportunity for somebody to get on board with it or not. That's the personal choice that we have zero control over. That's saying is that seeing like the emotional reaction is just simply, I'm confronting with something that like challenges their continuity, that challenges their like current reality, and they don't have room to see it any other way. So that's where it's like anything that I'm not currently living is automatically negative. The reaction is them like clinging to safety and security. And it's going to come out one way or another. So it might as well come out early so that they can start to wrap their mind around it. And, a lot of us don't like the confrontation piece because the big emotions, many of us have situations we came from where there was a lot of big emotions that never got resolved. It was just kind of like an ongoing process. And so like as an adult, it is like you kind of have to trust that people can handle things. It may take them a while to come around, but eventually they're going to have to. That's just part of life. And so I think it is the fearing the reaction is what makes us delay it. And I think it's just better to get it out of the way first, because even if I delay it, now I'm like, I have anxiety about delivering the news up until I deliver it, which is wasting a lot of energy as well. So it's better to just get out in front things, just put them out there, let them have the big reaction, and then give some space. And then in that space, that's where people kind of have to, they're forced to sit with it and figure out, reorient their mind to what this might look like. And for a lot of people, that's scary. They like the predictability. And so the unknown is automatically a negative thing when, that's what's cool about this work is you're basically with the growth mindset, you like actually prefer the unknown over the known. You're like, yeah, I want new things. I want better things, and I'm willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing because I trust that that's going to lead to a brighter future rather than that default negative.
So I have one more question that's in this vein before before we switch to some maybe less serious questions, maybe. It's not super dissimilar to negativity bias, but if someone's needing to have a tough conversation with someone else about how they're being impacted by the other person's behavior, what would be your recommendations in how to start?
It's always going to be filled with an anxiety, because it's like if somebody's like doing something that they're not aware of and it's really affecting us, generally we put up with that begin with because generally we grew up in environments that was supported, that there was just a dominant personality and they need to be right all the time and whatever they do wins out and it doesn't really matter what I say. Okay. And so that's where what generates the anxiety is like when we're raised in that, we feel powerless around these types of situations and we think we just have to put up with them. That's part of like getting our power back is regaining it from the version of us that didn't have a voice, the version of us that just had to put up with things. And so, that's a big part of getting our strength back is this ability to stand up and speak to what's right and in that we're not going to be treated certain ways and that kind of thing. First, it is going back to those original times where you felt that way and kind of breathing into that and exploring that and trying to soften the energy behind it. Because if I don't address any of that, my mind's automatically going to go to, this is going to go nowhere. They're not going to listen to me. It's going to get plugged into all the old stories when it really didn't make a difference. Okay. So we do have to address that piece first in order to kind of soften the anxiety. And then, I want to get to the place where I feel strong about it, where I feel like I'm centered and balanced and I'm going to deliver this news. And the person is probably going to have some sort of reaction. If they don't take a lot of accountability or if they're not very aware as a person, we might get a big reaction initially. And it's just kind of knowing that that's part of the process. Once again, it's like if you're ever in a situation where there's some fears attached to that is like, is this person, maybe physically abusive or something like that? We probably don't want this approach. But, with somebody where we don't feel like we're in danger, one of the most powerful things we can do is to hold up the mirror to them, is we can, hey, show them, hey, this is what's going on and this is how it's affecting me. Most people just aren't aware. They're not like intentionally like doing harm. There are people that are doing intentionally do harm. We just kind of have to know who we're dealing with. But, most people like they're just not aware that what the damage they're doing. Our job is to create awareness, being like, okay, when you did this, this is how this made me feel, or this is what happened to me as a result, and all those kinds of things. We're just basically trying to show them what's happening because most of the time they're probably not conscious that that's happening. So, and a lot of times when we're faced with that, if I'm faced with this idea that like, oh, I may have hurt somebody else, that's not going to feel very good to me and I might get defensive. It's just kind of know, but the first step is at least putting it out there and then seeing what the reaction is. If somebody's wants to do better, like, they might have the initial reaction, but then they'll come back and they might say they're sorry. They might try to do things to repair if they take accountability. But, that's once again, that's a variable we don't know. But it's like we always create the situation so the reaction comes up because the reaction is the opportunity for things to change. If I just suffer in silence the whole time, there's almost zero possibility that things are going to shift. If I do the earlier work in my life and situations I felt that way, I can make progress there. But eventually that's going to build up to me being able to use my voice powerfully. So I might be able to soften a lot of that stuff. I might be able to work through a lot of the anxieties, but I am going to be met with some challenges or experiences where like it's going to be healing for me to really speak up and to own my voice and to own my boundaries and my space and all those things. And it's probably going to be uncomfortable and we're probably going to stumble through it. But it's really this ability to stick with it and work through those discomforts to get to the other side of it. A lot of these confrontational situations, it may take a number of times of revisiting it before we get resolution. So it's the ability to stick with it, which we talk about quite often here is like, usually it's just not one conversation. The one conversation brings up the big feelings. Now we got to let those settle down and then we reorient and then we go back at it through a different lens And we try to keep just dialing down the big emotional reactions, and we do that through activating them and then letting them subside, activating them, letting them subside. It's the back and forth that allows people to rebalance out. If we're just going at somebody in attack mode, it's going to be all defense. So I'm trying to get as centered as possible to just present things, and I might acknowledge like, hey, like I know there wasn't any bad intention behind this. I want to assume that positive intent so that they don't feel like we're questioning their character and all that stuff too. There's just many ways we handle like the disarming stuff on the front end, and then we deliver the news. The disarming stuff is like, yeah, I know you didn't mean to do this, or it might have just been a miscommunication, or maybe you're not aware of this, but I just wanted to share this with you. And it's like that softer approach, like keeps their mind at least a little bit more open rather than just totally shut down in defensive mode.
Flipping to a few maybe more fun. That's not the right way to say it. It's not that those weren't fun. They were plenty fun. A little more lighthearted type of questions. Brandon, what's your favorite shoe brand?
Well, so I like to wear Jordans, for just kind of a sneaker. For working out, I like On. And I like to wear loafers and stuff too, and dress with my suits. So that I really like Taft. They do a lot of really cool designs, really nice craftsmanship on their shoe. So those are three that I'll regularly buy.
Along those same lines, I almost framed this up as a this or that, but then I didn't. Let's talk about a few other things that are like favorites or personals of yours. And these might seem silly, but maybe it just helps people get to know you a little bit on like a human level, relatable level. So like chocolate or vanilla.
Vanilla, definitely.
Oh,
I
say
only
more.
like I only like chocolate like if it's like paired with something else, like an almond, some sort of nut. But yeah, like just straight up, I like vanilla way more.
Interesting. Favorite place to visit.
Oh, that's a tough one. So, I mean, I've been to Miami like 20 times just because of baseball and all sorts of stuff. So, but yeah, I'm kind of burnt out on that. I really enjoy going to New York and big cities like that. I mean, Europe's been pretty cool the last couple summers. So, I'm just curious to see more and more of it. I don't know. I might go back to Paris or something, but I like the variety. So, like, I like to experience new places. Yeah, anywhere that's got like a big city vibe, I'm usually on board with it. Me and my girlfriend, we're actually going to go to Panama City here in a couple days. So that's in like Central America. It's got a lot of American influence down there, but it's got the Latin vibes too. So I'm excited to explore there. And yeah, it's just like anything new and exciting, I'm up for. I'm not too particular as long as it's got some variety to it.
So Panama City, Panama, not Panama City,
Yeah,
Florida.
yeah,
Just to be
Panama
clear.
City, Panama, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's the one I've always been curious about. They got like a lot of beautiful skyscrapers and stuff, and you know, we have the Panama Canal down there and all that. But it's cool because it's like beach, it's city, there's like rainforest, there's like all different aspects there. So I've always been kind of curious to check it out.
Cool. And you get to leave behind winter. Although I don't know if Nashville counts as winter.
Well, so last week it was rough. We were down to around 0, but now it's 50s. Next week it's actually going to be in the 60s. So it doesn't stay bad here too long.
What would you say you're most excited about right now?
There's just like a lot of interesting opportunities popping up. Everything like I teach here, like I actually do, right? So I'm not like a outcome-based, goal-based person. It's more of like just keep working on yourself and opportunities will come. And that's kind of, to start the year off, I had my best month ever. So like I'm super excited about that. I'm going on a podcast tomorrow. It's got a pretty big following that like came out of nowhere. There's a couple of those other opportunities I'm looking at to just try and expand my reach, do some partnership stuff. One of my clients, I'm going to be doing some like cycling camps with her. So she's like opening up my network there. It's just, there's just things like kind of filling in that, And I say I am just like always in the unknown. It's not that I'm not like shooting for certain things. It's just like a lot of times when I try to like directly make something happen, it doesn't ever happen on my time frame. So I'm surrendering a lot and I'm always just staying ready for when opportunities come. I'm just kind of, if it's exciting to me, I'll go do it. And I don't really need to think twice about it. And so, yeah, there's just like a lot of random stuff that's popping in right now that I'm excited about. I'm excited to expand my reach with this work and work with all different types of clients and stuff. So, yeah, it's just some good momentum going, and I'm just excited to see where that leads.
Well, that's maybe a good transition to this question, which is, who is your ideal client?
Every time I try to narrow it down, I get new types of people that I work with, and I'm just like, oh, this is fun for me. So it's just really somebody that's like looking for that deeper layer. Like I said, I prefer clients that have had some sort of like self-awareness work or therapy where they're kind of starting the path, and I'm like here to take them deeper. Because with somebody that's got some sort of foundation, I can run a little bit faster with them. And so yeah, I'm just more of in the place. I want to work with people that want to go deeper and are ready to go deeper. And I don't know if there's like any sort of frame I can put on that because it's just there's so many different types of people I'm working with right now, and it's all like fun work for me. So I guess I don't have a huge preference. It's just that person that's been searching a little bit and hasn't really found the answers, and they're ready to take those next steps, and because the deeper work is where we actually solve those things. So somebody that doesn't want kind of just like superficial strategies and things like that. I don't work off a strategy. I work out of like, let's just get you connected to you, and everything kind of stems from that pretty naturally. And so I think it's somebody that's probably exhausted a lot of other things and it hasn't quite worked, and they're just ready to try something at the deeper level.
Okay, cool. So we'll make a little pivot back to something maybe a little pop culture-y. Do you have a TV show that you're watching right now?
So I mentioned last week I kind of went through Landman and all that stuff, and that was all right, I guess. But I tend to watch a lot of older stuff, because I think the writing's different and it kind of connects me back to a younger version of myself. But recently I've been watching, it's called Tell Me Lies with my girlfriend. That's on Hulu. And it's about this group of like college kids. And it just like, and the one guy is like a total narcissist, and he like causes all these problems. He's basically torturing everybody, because he stirs up all this drama all the time. And so it's just kind of, it's interesting to see like what he's going to do next. And it does really remind me of college. I remember college, it's just like everybody's just kind of drunk all the time, just trying to figure things out. And it's like messy. There's all this drama all the time. And so it kind of really, I think they've done a really good job of kind of portraying like normal college situations. And the storylines are pretty interesting where they really build the characters well. And it's funny, like like two of the main characters, like they're like on and off again in the show, but then they're actually like dating in real life. On the show, the guy's like a nightmare. He's like ruining everybody's life around him. And so like I guess like when they're out and about, like everybody gets pissed off at him, and they're like telling her to get away from him and stuff because because he does such a good job of playing that role on the show that he's just like an easy like enemy. And so I think they've done a really good job with that. And so it's kind of just enjoying to seeing those dynamics. It's a lot of the like mental health stuff, and like, it digs into a lot of the work I do because, any client I'm working with, we always take it back to earlier in life, whether that's college, high school, childhood. And so a lot of these situations are pretty common, that I work on. And so there's a lot of connection there.
Have you ever watched Shrinking?
People ask me that all the time. I watched like a half hour one time, and I just never picked it back up. At some point I probably will, but I've heard it's really good.
So good. So good. But to the point of like the mental health things and all of that. It's worth 30 minutes a week. Okay, this is going to feel like a hard left.
Okay.
We on this podcast, talk a lot about ego and the function of the ego. And recently I was listening to another podcast with Mark Manson, and he was talking about his definition of ego, that when we're approaching things, with this idea of like needing an ego death, that maybe takes it too far. He's like, you do need a little, like, to stay alive. You need to have some ego. But we kind of touch on ego death, and I think maybe 2 or 3 podcasts ago you brought that up a little bit in relation to Alex Rodriguez. Maybe talk a little bit more about your definition of ego death and what parts of ego you see as like necessary to stay alive versus the parts of ego that when we say it, people automatically think of, right? Like, oh, that guy's an ego maniac.
I think it's a very misunderstood idea. The ego is important for it is our survival mechanism. It's also what creates individuality. So, when you dive into like the spiritual stuff, or you hear people talk about doing plant medicine and things like that, the ego dissolves, right? And so you just get like absorbed into everything, right? So you start to see that we're all the same at the core, right? And so there's like, but in order to experience life, we need to be separate from everybody else. And that's what it does. It's just like, okay, this is me. Because if my mind's wide open, like all those lines get blurred. If I'm going to experience life as an individual, like I do need some sort of identity. And so there's just varying degrees of it. So when people say somebody's an egomaniac, that's generally meaning they're really like selfish. They don't care about other people. It's all about them, like that kind of thing. And everything's to like serve them. And yeah, that's an adaptation, certainly. But there's also people that their like ego or identity is wrapped up in people pleasing and sacrificing all the time and giving all of themselves away. So there's just all these different expressions of it. And so with the topic of ego death, it's really like, well, it's getting to the place of like I'm questioning like my current reality of like who I think I am. And if I'm confronted with a lot of things that no longer match up with me, okay, so I'm growing a lot. I'm like, I have a lot of strong desires to be something different in terms of like with the way I show up in the world. Our ego is going to limit us to basically our identity and who we believe we are. So that's the continuity piece of like, yeah, I'm like pretty sure this is what I do, right? And this is how people relate to me. And so a lot of times to get to the next level of like owning your self-worth and having clear boundaries with people and showing up in a way that's authentic, a lot of times we need like a lot of the protection mechanisms we've built around ourselves need to fall away. And because they're designed to keep us safe and so that we survive, it can create a lot of fear. It can create a lot of inner turmoil of like, I don't know who I am without these identities. Okay. And so that's what's like so hard is like when you're wrestling with the ego, it's always trying to maintain these things. But that's why with this work, we go to the bottom of like, okay, what like originally happened to you and let's heal that. And it's like a more elegant way where like those ego layers just naturally start to dissolve rather than me having to like fight against them. And, I've experienced like extreme versions of this, like, with baseball and, different roles I was playing in life where I'm just got to the point where I'm like, I can't do it anymore. And when I can't do it anymore, like everything that's not me, like has to fall away. Okay. And so a lot of the things we attach our identity to, that kind of puts us in a little bit of a box and that can get uncomfortable if we're growing a lot. So I might need to expand that box, and I go through this all the time with coaching. It's like, everybody's like, yeah, like have a specific title and have your specific niche and all that. But it's just like, all that feels like limiting for me. And so every time I try to do those things, it like doesn't feel authentic, right? Because I'm just like, no, like, I think I'm like kind of beyond that in terms of like, I've like shed so many layers of my ego. It's like, I don't even like care what people call me. Like like, I don't attach my identity to it. It's just like, I want to help and serve. And so it's like the label stuff, it just depends on who I'm working with. It just depends on who I'm talking to. And so it's just like the ego creates all these categories. And with the categories, we assign all these meanings to things of like, just so like I know what this is. So And if you say like life coach, Tony Robbins was like the original one, but then it's been this like commoditized thing over time. Now it's like people have good experiences and they have really bad experiences, right? Because it just depends on how good the coach is, how hard they work at it and stuff. And so, well, like if I say the label, and if somebody's had a bad experience, like they're automatically going to have a negative reaction to it. Okay. And so the way I do things is to not plug people into ego. It's more of just like, okay, like I'm here to like guide you through the things that are holding you back, which is like their ego, right? It's like you've had to learn to protect yourself in certain ways, and that worked for a certain amount of time, but you're becoming so much greater, and these things are limiting you and they're shutting you down. And so, yeah, the ego death is just that questioning, who am I really? Like, what am I even doing? Like, why am I doing these things? You sort of like start asking these deeper questions, and then you start to realize like, oh, I might have just been doing this to prove somebody wrong. I might have just been doing this because, my parents demanded perfection. And so I felt like I had to be perfect. And so I built this life that I thought would make them happy. And it never does. But those are all the games that the ego plays. It's in the status game. It's in the, even, the religious game with like moral superiority and stuff. Like, these are all like expressions of the ego of like, I'm always trying to get a leg up. But the closer you get to truth, it's like none of that stuff matters. Okay. And so when we have an ego death, is like you're getting closer to that truth of like, okay, these labels no longer fit, these ideas no longer fit. And if I was trying to force myself into that, that would feel terrible to me. Okay. So once you establish greater awareness, you can't like go back. Because if you go back, you have this increased sensitivity and it's like 10 times worse. Right. So you hit a breaking point where you kind of have to keep moving forward. You have to keep digging in and going closer to truth. Last week we talked about digging deeper. Like that's what we're talking about, is like, I'm trying to get to the center point where all these games like don't exist, because it's those games that create all the problems in our lives. That's it. We need people playing the games. Alan Watts talks about this. He's just like, yeah, like, there's like the monks that sit around and meditate all day. Like that was like allotted for in society. Okay. But they don't like have to function as normal people. They don't have to work a job, like all that stuff. And, to exist in society, like we all have to have a role. It's like, this is what I do. This is how I earn money. This is what I contribute. And so once again, it's like getting to that point of like, well, this can't be all there is to life, is to just exist on this level. And so when you go deeper, you get to the point of when you have enough like ego death and you get to that truth. Alan Watts describes this as he's just like, what he considers an exceptional person is somebody that's gone the depths and has had their like spiritual awakening where they like realize like we're all connected and we're all the same on the basic level. But then they also like come out of it where they can like function in society with that perspective. It's a very difficult thing to do because, my late 20s, that's when I went into meditation, for massive amount, it was like 6-7 hours every day. Like I was just like sitting alone with myself and like all these things started to dissolve and fall away. And I wasn't like really participating in anything. And so it's like, yeah, you can like do that for the rest of your life, but like, that's what I didn't desire that. I just want to clean the slate so that I can be more connected to who I am and build from this like healthy place rather than just all these patterns. And, and so, it was like, I stuck with it until the point it's like, okay, this is like the foundation I want to build from. Okay. Is like, I've cleaned it up enough where I'm bringing more of that perspective of like, and like the deeper I go, it's like the more I can connect at that level, because I see like all these problems that people have are just expressions of the ego that they're trying to protect themselves from something. And we just have to figure out what that is. And so once we get there, now that starts to soften, and then it frees up the energy to move forward rather than the past. So the ego is just the accumulation of your past. And that's going to be like what all the wounds, all the traumas, all the beliefs about yourself. And if that's not working for you, we go into that and make some adjustments so that you can expand who you are into something new rather than just reliving the past over and over again.
That was good. You got any closing thoughts on that kind of meandering list of questions?
This was fun. I like the format. Maybe we'll do it more often. Just, taking things and running from with it. I do see the value in having the specific topic we go into, but I think having things open-ended here and there is helpful. And yeah, like I'm always willing to kind of share insights into who I am so that people can get to know me a little bit better. So yeah, I like this.
Cool. So on that note, if you've got a question for Brandon, please reach out to us with that question. You can DM it, you can email it to the podcast, you can email it to Brandon, you can reach out to one of us. Any of those things will work. So the more questions, the better. We'll do more of this. This was fun. So yeah, do you want to kind of wrap on where people can find you if they're interested and anything else you want to touch on before we call this one?
If you're curious about this work and want to go deeper and are ready, as I outlined earlier, if other things haven't worked for you, so a lot of times we can find some of those answers here. So, if you're curious about it, you can schedule a free 30-minute strategy session with me on my website, brandonthielk.com. I just get a sense of what you got going on and share some insights on how I can help. Also, if you want to register for my newsletter, The Lightning Report, you can also do that through the website. So each Monday, I send out some updates on the business and the podcast summary and some insights to kind of ponder for the week. If you want to follow along on social media on YouTube and Instagram at Brandon Thielk, we post out there pretty regularly. Also at bthielk on TikTok. So please like, subscribe, follow, ask any questions. I would love to hear from you guys.
Cool. As always, all of the links for all of those things will be in the show notes or the YouTube description if you're watching this on YouTube. So this was good.
All
Thanks,
right. See
Brandon.
you next time. Yep.